joining us on Always Be Connecting. Really enjoyed the last 5 months talking to people and finding about connecting with authenticity and purpose. And if you've enjoyed some episodes also, I'd love it if you'd give us a review on Spotify or iTunes or wherever reviews live on the internet. And if you want to share episodes with people, that would be great too. This episode is about reputation. So if you do know somebody who has possibly gone through a job loss or lost a big client and they felt like they haven't been able to defend themselves or their name, then they're going to find this episode really useful. Today we are talking about a woman who has clearly worked hard all of her career and got to a point where she was quite a public figure. And then a few years ago, her reputation was called into question. Now, some people may view her as the guilty party, and some others may view others as protagonists in the situation. And I'm not talking about Taylor Swift. So in your career, it's a bit of a game of snakes and ladders. And sometimes you can hit a snake through no more reason than a roll of the dice. So today I am talking to the fearless Amy Brown.
Hi, Lindsay. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, although I should probably say that at the end of the interview rather than at the start, but I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. So some people may call you the former CEO of Investment New South Wales. That seems like a given title. Is that the title you want? How would you like to be known?
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the best roles I ever had was CEO of Investment New South Wales, so happy to go by that. Right at the end of my career, my 10 years in New South Wales government, they actually started a new department called Enterprise Investment and Trade, and I was made what's called secretary of that department, which means that you're head of the department. But I sort of still kept my CEO title because to the outside world, that makes a lot more sense in terms of, you know, what I did and what I was leading. So it was a bit of a dual role. So pick whichever one you want.
Yeah. And so you were leading a team of 600?
Yeah, so right at the end, the final kind of version of the department actually had 4,500 people because we brought in all the arts and culture institutions and sport and, you know, hospitality and things like that. But in terms of Investment New South Wales, when that was started up, yeah, it was kind of between 600 and 800 people, depending on how you counted it. So big team. New mandate, I suppose, bringing together all the things that make New South Wales a great place to do business. So I was really fortunate because I got to represent kind of the public sector back into the private sector so that we could form great partnerships.
So we're going to be talking about 3 eras. There's a lot of Taylor Swift references, I think, in this episode.
Oh, why not?
So let's talk about the before Amy Brown. Who is she? What are her values? What's she like?
Great question. And I think we'll find as this interview unravels, Amy Brown is always the same Amy Brown, no matter what I have walked through. So identity-wise, I'm a Christian, I'm a mum, and I am a senior executive leader. I've led, obviously, teams and organisations, started off life as a lawyer and then came into the public service, which I absolutely loved because you get a chance to make a real tangible impact on the state in which you live if you work for state government. And, I mean, leadership-wise, I have quite some time ago I identified my kind of values that I wanted to walk in as a leader, and they're courage, empathy and self-discipline. I suppose that's my identity, if you will, or the who am I?
Yeah, sure. Because if you were to Google you're pretty much defined by this one event that we'll talk about later. But you define yourself Christian, mother, hard worker.
Yeah.
What do you want from your job? You want impact and
Yeah, that's right. I'm very kind of mission-led. And so the mission of the organisation that I'm working for really has to be real. You know, because my dad moved to Australia. Well, we moved to Australia when I was 9.
Okay.
And that came about because my dad, who grew up in very impoverished circumstances in the valleys of Wales, we were talking about Wales earlier, with living in really terrible kind of housing conditions, no electricity, no hot water, an outside toilet shared between 4 families.
Yeah,
and it was actually his access to good quality public education. They got moved to a safe and secure council house, and he got mentored by the GP in the local community who saw a twinkle in Dad's eye when he talked about medicine. That enabled him to actually get a scholarship to London University to study medicine. And that broke his cycle of intergenerational disadvantage on my behalf. And so career-wise, it didn't take me long to work out that I started gravitating toward roles that really did enable access to opportunities for, Australians. Things like schools and hospitals and transport and a really strong justice system, because these are kind of the foundations that enable people to be independent, productive, connected and well. And, I think, career-wise, that really has meant a strong chunk of it in the public service or working on projects that are very similar to that, that kind of how do we provide best services and infrastructure for our state. So that's basically the journey as to how I got to where I got to.
We're really fortunate in Australia that we do have the infrastructure to sort of fill in the gaps.
That's right. Yeah, strong healthcare system. We're always investing. We can always do better. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. There's a lot that needs to be done there, and government can't solve it alone. It needs to partner with the private sector, not-for-profits, tertiary institutions, everyone. It's an all-hands-on-deck sort of problem. But that's part of the work that I did in government, was to create those partnerships, all angles.
So, but then early on, you were a lawyer.
Yes.
And I've read something that you said about being quite strategic, competitive, strong-willed in getting promotions and getting ahead. How would you describe that period?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I feel like that whole advice you'd give to your younger self kind of stuff. I probably would tell myself to slow down a bit, take a breath.
Really?
Yeah, I came out of school and pretty much started working full-time in a barrister's chambers within my first year of university. So I was doing my law degree and working at the same time, which meant I kind of got a graduate role at a great law firm, ended up going overseas, coming back. I didn't take a lot of breaks in that time. Even when I had kids, I was kind of rushing back to work. And while, that was great, I ended up kind of, with quite senior leadership roles at a relatively young age. I probably didn't need to be in such a rush, but because, of the model that I had in my father, who just worked so hard because he had lifted himself out of disadvantage, it was just sort of modeled to me that that's how you roll.
Yeah. And he probably felt a debt as well to...
Yes, and I felt a debt to him, because I had the best education that our country can provide.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine he reminded you a lot.
He was pretty good, but I definitely I wanted to work hard because I knew that it had been earned for me.
But your past self gave you a great foundation. So
absolutely,
you've got to be grateful for what she did.
Yes. And you, at the end of the day, we end up where we are because of everything that's happened in our life. So you wouldn't change anything, even if you could go back and just, tell your former self to just calm the fire a little bit sometimes.
So you get to CEO of Investment New South Wales, and why not give yourself the extra role of being secretary of another department? That's a lot to do. So, you're not slowing down at that point. Hey, what's the sort of day-to-day like there?
Yeah, I mean, very senior government roles are so interesting because you really are at the forefront of decision-making for our state. So even prior to that, I was quite involved with some of the stuff during COVID. I was really, when we were talking about right, what's the public health response, which is to kind of, keep people a bit locked down and really limit physical and social interactions. But I brought in a little bit of the conversation around, well, what does that look like for well-being and what does that look like for equality across our state? So only 68% of kids in the lowest socioeconomic bracket even have the internet. So what does learning at home look like for them? And what's that going to do to that generation if we do kind of keep them all learning from home for too long? Or what about libraries? Even though there's not a huge economic benefit to opening a library, it's actually the place that a lot of people go for access to information that they might not get anywhere else. So I was kind of bringing in those well-being conversations and what a privilege to actually, have been involved with Premier Berejiklian and some of these, phenomenal, particularly women leading the health department, for example. There was kind of that really front row tickets to the show element of being a senior bureaucrat. Things like briefing into cabinets to enable good decision making, getting my teams to work on, well, why do we make the decisions we do as a state? What's the economic impact? What's the impact societally? What are these sort of social policies that we want to enable, look after people who are vulnerable or enable kids to be able to learn well, to help people with preventative healthcare, for example, so they don't end up in hospital, helping people who are in trouble with the justice system not to end up at the worst end of that scale. So these sort of decisions are being made, and we needed to make sure that our decision makers, who we voted for, had the right access to information. And it's funny that the role that you have in the company you have around storytelling, because a lot of the time facts and figures get you so far, but people need to feel something before they can think something.
And these are big, lofty dreams, goals.
Yeah.
And no one's going to do that alone. So in the spirit of always be connecting, how are you rallying a team and actually getting results, things done?
Yeah, great question. And people do describe me as a bit of a connector. I think a lot of the time when we were struggling in terms of getting the right, progressing projects or getting the right policy outcome, it's because people were operating in silos. So, a lot of the time we needed a kind of whole of state view on something. Someone's not just a student or just a patient or just a passenger. They are all of those things at the same time. So how does health, education, transport, customer service wrap around that person to enable them to live their lives? So it was actually really helpful for me because I sat at the centre. When I returned to government, I came into the Premier's department to actually bring people together, break down the silos and then start those kind of communications chains. Fortunately, as a public servant, you all want the same thing. You all have a great vision for New South Wales. You want, so we're all on the same page. You can keep that vision
in the centre of
the North Star, absolutely. Which is why I love working with public servants, because we all want to make the state better. How
are you doing that? How are you breaking the silos? How are you? Is it pub lunch or?
Not as a public servant, it's not. No, I think a lot of the time, and again, I think there's so much power in getting some of those top tables together, because that's how the information disseminates and the culture kind of disseminates,
Yeah.
So it's right, we're going to get around the table with the head of health and the head of education, the head of transport, and say, okay, how do we actually start to integrate some of our projects so that people aren't just getting a single experience with government, they're actually getting a great experience. So a good example would be, for example, our COVID response. We learnt a lot during bushfires where, people had lost everything, their houses had burnt down. They then, stand up, catch their breath, and they have 9 government departments all asking them questions. So for COVID, we had a single port of information, nsw.gov.au/COVID-19, where they could find out everything that they needed to know, the public health information, what it means for business, what it means for their transport, just all of it in the one spot. Now, that doesn't just happen by one department waking up one day and starting a whole of government website. So it was kind of those central agencies, premiers, customer service. You know, our citizens are customers. That concept only came in kind of 5 to 10 years ago, and saying, right, how do we actually service the person, and what do they need? How do they need to feel like a customer? And interestingly, often the people who feel least like customers are the ones who need us the most. It's people who've had a negative experience with government through the child protection system or the justice system or the housing system. We need to rebuild. Disbelief. They're the ones that we need to rebuild trust with, because we want them to come to us when they need support, rather than, running away or trying to, or just feeling like there's nobody there to help. So, I think it's all easy for you and me to have agency to go to Service New South Wales and renew our driver's licence. But for some people, they don't want anything to do with government at all. So how do we help them? So it was those conversations we were able to have. And, I feel like it was, you can always room for improvement, but we were definitely heading in the right direction.
Yes, sure. So like being a public servant, what does that mean to you?
I absolutely loved being a public servant. It's interesting, the clue is in the word service. I once heard it said, it's sort of similar to the military. We give medals to people who sacrifice their lives for the sake of others. In the corporate world, we give bonuses to those who sacrifice others for the sake of themselves. Like, it's got that kind of, purpose and service to it. I actually believe we're all 8 million of us are custodians of this state. And so spending a bit of your career, it could be 3 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 30 years, actually in the public service, it's almost like that duty to give back. And then, people often then go back out and do what they were doing before. So I just encourage people who've never quite thought about it to think about, well, how could my skills be useful?
How do you serve?
How do you serve? So loved it, would recommend it to anyone. It had a hard ending for me. I think when you finish something, I lost my agency in it. I ended not on my own terms or my own timing. But as I said, I'm a Christian, so I believe there's a bigger purpose to that.
Yeah. So you're driving change with vision for serving people. Yeah. And doing good things, working your butt off, I'm assuming.
That was fair.
And a shadow comes from behind you like a Dementor from Harry Potter.
I know, yes. Out of nowhere. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's like
so how did this creep? How did it start appearing and building? And what was that like?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I remember vividly, I was at a dinner at Macquarie Bank, and I'd actually been asked to give a 10-minute address to guests, which were, CEOs and chairs from across the big city, on how government and the private sector could partner together for better economic outcomes for Australians or whatever. And fortunately, because I was nervous, I had my phone face down on the table.
Why were you nervous?
Because I had to give an address to important people.
Okay. Yeah.
We all get nervous.
Yeah.
Even though it's probably something I did multiple times a week. But this was a particularly tough crowd. And as I was, it was 10 p.m. when it concluded, quite late for a school night. And as I was descending to street level in the fancy glass elevators, I glanced at my phone. I had hundreds of missed calls. And I thought, oh my goodness, what happened? Who died? Did the Premier resign? Did Meghan and Harry break up? Did I win Lotto? And it turned out, I was all over ABC News that evening, and people wanted to know what was going on. I didn't even know what was going on. I hadn't seen it.
Who were these messages from?
Just around, friends, other public servants. Yep. People all going, are you okay? What is this?
Yeah.
And it's hard in those circumstances because, like anything, sometimes things blow up that constitute, 1% of your job. And a lot of the events that were playing out in the media happened well over a year before. So it's not that I wasn't on top of my job, but, most of us can't remember what we did last week. So it was kind of, piecing all of that together, taking rapid fire briefs from my team and, basically kind of trying to figure out exactly what all this meant, and how I was going to respond and so on. And
what was the story at that point?
Yeah, so the story, oh gosh, The story was
objectively.
The story objectively was that particularly, someone who had been deemed a bit of an interesting character, an ex-politician, had been had been appointed to a high-profile overseas posting. And, the story was that it was jobs for the boys, plum roll, what was going on, head of the department, complete debacle. And so that's basically how these things started to unfold.
And you've just been talking about how the most important part of your job is building trust with the public.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And kind of as it started to unfold, firstly, a parliamentary inquiry was called, which was absolutely the right answer. Because if the general public have concerns over a decision that's been made involving their taxpayer dollars, which this is, then they need to be given answers. And so I knew that I would be the first witness called because I was head of the department.
What does that mean? Why would you be the first? What was your role in the jobs for the boys?
Yes. So I was head of the Department of Enterprise, Investment and Trade, which carried responsibility for these overseas roles.
Yeah.
The way it played out, and it took a long time to get to this kind of level of detail, but these roles were in quite a grey zone in terms of how the rules worked around the recruitment process, which people wouldn't have known at that point. They just kind of saw this outrageous incident.
Yeah.
So that made it very complicated because, as we all know, black and white we can all do, operating in the grey. There's a lot of subjectivity there and a lot of people with opinions that they might do things differently.
Sure.
Whereas we all
and
just
in
do
the
the
grey
best
in the
we
paper.
can. The grey and they're all coming out in the paper. And so my signature was on the employment contract. So I was called to the inquiry and I knew that early on, one of the first questions would be basically I put my hand on the Bible, which means a lot to me. It means a lot to anyone. I don't know anyone who would lie under oath. And got asked questions around whether some of the statements that had been made in the media were correct by the government at the time. And I basically contradicted what they had said. So that did not make my future with the government look very promising. But that's, leaders, look, we can all talk about courage with our teams and integrity. What is courage? And I'm like, courage means having hard conversations with my team. Courage means giving feedback. Sure. What does courage mean when you are, sitting in a room alone, being questioned by a panel of 10 people with media cameras everywhere? Courage when you're by yourself looks really different. As in, you got to be even stronger because it's that crucible. You're in the hottest part of the flame.
I think that's interesting as well because when I opened the episode of this episode could be good to somebody who's lost a job or lost a big client, and I feel like my own sort of story of that was because it had reached a point where I either had to toe the line or do something that I thought was right.
Yeah.
And I chose do what I thought was right.
Do what's right. I think Brené Brown talks about integrity is choosing courage over comfort and doing what's right over what is fast, easy or fun.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I knew, as these things were unfolding, I mean, initially I just hoped that this whole thing would be over soon and I'd get to keep my job. But once it was clear that that wasn't going to happen, the media story was building and building. And we could talk about gender a bit in that context as well. I thought, no, I can't outrun this. I just have to walk through it. And that's what courage looked like for me. It was doing one day at a time, whatever was required of me as a result of our, parliamentary system. I had obligations. I had to show up, give answers, go to inquiries, prepare, study, like I was studying the HSC, because the level of detail you need to know about events that unfolded over a course of, over a year. That
to give the correct answers.
Yeah, you're under oath. You can't mess it up. If you do mess it up, you have to go back and correct yourself. So there was a lot of technicality that was a lot of legislative questions because, our entire system is underpinned by things like legislation and regulation and rules. So knowing them, I mean,
are you a good person for the rules? Do you like the rules?
Yeah,
you like a good rule?
I'm an ex-lawyer, so I do, and I do quite like the black and white. What's the right thing to do here? Which is what made this tricky because it was grey. Yeah. It was all very grey.
So you're going
just
through
do the next right thing.
You're going through this, and we've got daughters the same age, so we know each other. And so this was visible to me. I saw it on Twitter. I saw it on the news. So you're in a situation where your hairdresser's seen it, your baker has seen it,
my mum and dad,
your mum and dad, your kids, everyone are watching this questioning of your reputation and your integrity unfold at a media level. Yeah. And not only that, but you got a whole bunch of people commenting on it as well. And I saw comments about your religion,
heaps,
and comments about were you good at your job and all those sorts of things. So that is easy to see it on the paper, but I can't imagine going through that. What happened there?
Yes. And this, interestingly, what you referenced religion, I mean, this is where my Christian faith came into play. I realised the importance of my Christian faith more than I ever had before, because this is your identity. This is who you are. My identity is not tethered to my job. It's tethered to my beliefs and my values and my faith.
Yeah. And your community.
And my community, exactly, who wrapped around and supported. I sort of think, well, if I wouldn't go to so-and-so for their advice, I'm probably not going to take their criticism. So I did kind of try and shield myself a bit from taking every comment. I wouldn't have read any social media about myself. That's crazy. I'm like, you know what? I know who I am. I'm going to walk through this. There's it's a Bible verse, but it's a good saying anyway. Times of trial refine us like fire refines a precious metal. And maybe a lot of that, the kind of wisdom around it came a bit after the fact. But at the same time, walking through it, I thought, this is going to be hard. I'm going to put one foot in front of the other. In Jim Collins' Good to Great, it talks about the Stockdale paradox, which is an unwavering belief that everything will be all right in the end, but understanding the reality of the circumstances you're in.
Okay.
Not diminishing it, dealing with it appropriately, knowing it's hard, but, still not being unrealistically optimistic. That can actually be really unhelpful, No, this is actually hard. I need to be the best self I can be.
Yeah.
Rely on my community. Setbacks are hard because you feel out of control. So I thought, no, I say I believe in the God who is in control. Do I really? If I really do, that's going to change how I walk through this. So, keep walking through it.
Can you get to that level of leaning on your faith or leaning on your community without being pretty down first? Did you have moments where things were pretty shit?
Yeah, and I do describe it, I talk about I was walking through a valley, so I wasn't on a mountaintop with a glorious view. But I think a lot of people say they learn more in the valley about who they really are and what's really important to them and, who their loyal people are. Then on a mountaintop, we all are best selves because everything's going great.
Yeah.
It's when the wheels come flying off and you're thrown out the wagon and dragged along on your face. That's when you're like, okay, I don't have the security of being in a position of leadership and success in this moment. I have a position of, the opposite. So without that to rely on, with the fact that all these things that I had made good taken away, okay, so what's really good? Because I don't have that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
So the stuff that was made good was, beliefs, family, faith, community, friends.
So what was the loss? Because we talked a little bit about earlier, maybe before this podcast, that there are people that you work with when you lose a job that they have to get back to what they're doing.
Yep.
Towing the line.
Oh,
and they can't necessarily reach out to you like they possibly did when you were working together. So like there's a loss of relationships there.
Yes, which is hard because I believe we've been created for relationships. So when relationships are taken away under any circumstances, it's hard, you know, that's not how it's meant to be. I think for some people, self-preservation transcends courage. I really believe that if someone close to me is going through something, I will find a way to support them. I would find a way, even if that meant risking stuff myself. But I mean, that's where courage comes in, right? So yeah, that the relationships side of it was hard. I've written about that since, and then after the fact, you know, finally being spat out the other side toward the end of that year, 2022, then going, oh my goodness, what's next? And what does this mean for me? You know, in the job market, and finding the words for it. Like when you go through something, it actually takes quite a few months to be able to articulate exactly what happened because you're in survival mode and you come out like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards. So, yeah, that was a process as well, I think.
Did you have a day where it was like working, stop? What do I do today?
Yeah. I think...
And what did you do? Did you like have a gin or?
I was pretty self-controlled, probably. I probably went for a run.
You're so good.
Yeah, no, I think I came out of it and I think I asked myself a few questions. What do I want to do with this time that I can't do normally, right? So some of that is being more present for the kids and putting my hand up to, you know, organise some touch footy, comp and this and the other. So that was actually quite special. I knew I needed, and then I wanted to work on some almost professional personal development stuff. I did a public speaking course. Interestingly, the whole storytelling thing came out of that. Looked after for like, you know, take a friend to a meal who's going through cancer or, you know, those type of things that normally I'm like rushing, might send them a text. I'm like, hold on, how do I show up for this person? I now have been given almost a blessing in disguise of more time. So how am I going to use it? And then I had to search for a job. And when you go through something hard, you're like, whoa, what do I want to do next? Because, you know, there's still some battle scars. And so it's like, oh, hold on. How do I want to go back into another public service? Do I want to go full-blown corporate money for shareholders? Do I want something in between that? So it took quite a number. And I worked with a coach and did all that good stuff, identified strengths. And, yeah, that took longer than I thought, I think, to just work through. Well, I'm only, you know, I've just turned 46. I've got another 20 years of this stuff. So what does the next season look like? And how do I take some control back over what I want it to look like?
So I want to talk a little bit more about the religious community because I think, like, Scott Morrison said that, and it rings in my ears, that a non-religious person is somebody without faith. I disagree. Like I
disagree too.
I've got faith. Faith isn't exclusive to.
Gosh, no, we don't own the concept of faith
with religion, but possibly the community thing is not there. Is something that I'm interested about in religious circles. Tell me a little bit about what your community does and how they work together.
Yeah, what a great question. And it reminds me, we did some work when I was in Premier and Cabinet around the epidemic of loneliness, which is, you know, I think the chief health officer or something in the US has declared it the new public health epidemic, loneliness, isolation.
Yeah.
And if we think about the world's longest running study on happiness, basically, and you know our signs of flourishing as a kind of society are on the decline. People are feeling more and more lonely. They talk about quality of relationships as being the biggest predictor of people who are, you know, calm, happy, fulfilled, supported. And
unable to go through.
And when we were doing our kind of recommendations around this loneliness epidemic, and the stuff we were talking about more opportunities for community and interaction and being part of belonging.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just kept going, oh, this is what faith groups, a lot of faith groups have. It's not unique to Christians. The Jewish community and the Muslim community and all Hindu, all being part of something bigger than yourself. And I think when you are part of those, some sort of a church or something along those lines, you're called to look after each other. Let's not give up meeting together and encourage each other. It talks about, look after the widows and orphans and people who are in need. That's where a lot of that kind of charitable side of it comes through. And we couldn't eat all the meals that were delivered to our house during that time because people are like, okay, I don't know what Amy's going through. I don't really understand it. It's some weird political thing, but I do know she doesn't have time to cook. So I'll just take her some food.
Lots of lasagnas.
Yeah, lots of lasagnas. Can I drop you? Can I give your kid a lift? Maybe you don't want to, show up to this today. I'll just take you. Nice. That sort of thing. So the community was a huge, huge blessing. Which is good.
Because I've heard you talk about third places as well before. So where third places could be a church group or
absolutely
synagogue, mosque.
Yeah, it could be. It's places that you can go. It's not your work, it's not your home, but you can go and just build community. For the teenagers that are out there, they can try new things and be a bit silly and learn about themselves and figure out friendships. It's those sort of spaces that I think more and more we're lacking in the way we design public realm. A lot of things you have to now pay to go into, and that that doesn't work, does it, for a lot of people, particularly teens, and that's driving them more and more online, and that applies to adults as well. So it's getting out of that and getting into places where you're going to have face-to-face interactions, conversation, learn something new. I'm a curious person, so I'm like, oh, tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing about having a podcast is it's all about idea sharing. So like having that community to talk together and work through problems or innovations or all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Do you think women can be public servants?
It's interesting you say that. If I were to name my top few favourite public servants in Australia, most of them are women.
Yeah.
So Emma Hogan was running customer service. Susan Pearce was running health. Georgina Harrison was running education. So we were all around the table at the same time, and they were so inspiring.
Yeah.
I think they can absolutely have those sort of roles. I think where it becomes tricky is when something doesn't go according to plan, such as in my circumstance, and whether or not gender starts to play out in that context. So for me, I was really interested or intrigued or puzzled by a lot of the media reports where I thought, you don't say that about a man. You don't say a man was promoted too soon. You don't say a man was, out of their depth or young. I kept getting described as young. I'm like, mid-40s is young these days. So that was
Dominic
weird.
Perrottet is younger than you, isn't he?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the irony. It's all a lot of the cabinet themselves were younger than me. But that was odd. And of course, some of the photos that were chosen, I thought, I wonder what that's trying to imply.
Sure. So you've got no control over that.
Yeah. And you just think, oh, well, at least I was having a good hair day.
Because that's why I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be public servant. Because, maybe I was a bit rogue in my early 20s.
Oh, they'd find that.
And I can't do it. It's just off the table. And, why should it be off the table? Maybe I've got things to give. Maybe I've got value to provide. But
and to be an empathetic leader, you have to hold on to those things about you. You have to hold on to the messy things or even the regrets or mistakes, because that makes you able to relate to people.
100%. How can you have a perfect government who's never put a foot wrong? Because if you don't know mess, then how can you clean it up?
Couldn't put it better myself.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So what can a woman do to, adequately guard herself but be vulnerable at the same time? What would your advice be?
I think one thing, this may or may not answer your question, but again, if I could turn back time, I think every person, but I'd say especially women, need a break glass in case of emergency plan. So I was naive. Like I kind of made it to the top table, so to speak, and I thought doing a good job would be enough, being conscientious, giving good advice, being a good leader. And so when things kind of, I woke up one day and thought, oh gosh, this is going to be hard. It took me too long to be like, who are the people? Who's my team who are going to gather around me? You know, someone influential who can speak well of me in rooms, you know, down the track when I then am back out there looking for what's next.
Investing
legal advice.
Reputation.
Who's your speed dial lawyer? Because some of this stuff can get quite technical. Your support crew, your cheerleaders, your wise work, you know, someone who's further on in their career and maybe they've walked through some stuff. Maybe in 10 years I can be that person to someone else. But who is your break glass in case of emergency, you know, rally around?
Did you have someone? Did you have someone who had been through it, who could talk to you? Yeah,
I definitely had people who, you know, reached out and came and met with me, you know, come over to my house because it didn't look like I could go out and sit in a cafe. Who were able to give advice and say, okay, I know this is really hard, but God's honest truth is going to be what wins the day. So you've just got to be absolutely unequivocally honest, and whatever will play out from there will play out. And then just, okay, what's next? What can this look like? Some left field ideas. So that's one of the blessings when you go through something unexpected, you end up somewhere that you never could have predicted because you've taken a absolute, you know, sharp left turn and gone, I didn't know this suburb existed, and then you're suddenly somewhere else. So
if you're taking a journey up the mountain, have your support crew and your community. Yeah. So you get advice and lasagnas.
Yes, advice and lasagnas. And then as time plays out, you've got to find the words for it. You've got to be able to tell your story. And I think why this is. Yeah. And that took time. I think I was telling you earlier, I recently read Julia Baird's Phosphorescence on Awe, Wonder and Things That Sustain You When the World Goes Dark. And in that book, I think it's about chapter 5, she talks about 2 ways to tell our stories. So one is a contamination story where our lives inevitably arc from good to bad. You know, things like in primary school, it started well, but I was bullied mercilessly and still wear the scars to this day. Like that arcs to. But the other type of story she terms a redemptive story. And that can be the same story, but told differently. In primary school, I was bullied mercilessly, but through that process found my one true friend whose loyalty was unsurpassed. Like that arcs toward the good, right?
Yeah.
And I think in anything that anyone goes through, there are 2 ways to tell the story, and I've become very much focused on telling a redemptive story. What's the good that came out of it, you know? How was I refined like a precious metal? What are the characteristics that I have now that I didn't have before? How am I a better leader, mum, friend, person? So that is really important to me.
But could you have had the redemptive story 1 month in?
No. That's such a good question. I mean, maybe some people can, but you don't know how it's going to play out just yet. Yeah. You know, you're trying to survive the day.
There must be a mix of anger, bitterness, maybe resentment that are effects of a situation like that. You were in the paper. People were like saying all sorts of things.
I know. Until the day Queen Elizabeth died, God rest her soul. But thank you.
Wow. Oh, sure. So how can you not react to that? How when you're put in that situation with negative feelings?
Yes. And often, I'm not a revenge type person, but often the best response, if we use that word instead, is actually just to say nothing.
Yeah.
You know, because if you come out swinging, you can often end up looking worse. The people who love me know who I am. I know who I am. I think look, I think it was pretty obvious to most people out there that this was, you know, I took the fall for something. And that's the way it was. Like, I think by constantly going back to it, all I'm doing is elongating the negative.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I was pretty good at shutting the door.
Let's shut that door. What's happening now?
Yeah, it's fascinating, because when I was then thinking about what's next, obviously there was, values alignment, mission alignment, that's a given.
Interesting, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was similar. Like, the first things I did was, like, figure out who I was, look for some inspiration, remind myself of my values, mission, and things like that.
Yes, and where am I going to be able to stand in them?
Yeah.
And what do you love? I'm like, what do I love? I love big people leadership. I love large organizations. Like, it took me a while to go, no, I'm not going to help that person with a startup or do this. I was like, no, I love lots and lots of people who need to be, united around a common mission and feel like they can try new things, put forward new ideas. It's that kind of enablement and even like psychological safety or something to be able to say, why don't we try this? So create those sort of cultures, brave cultures. So, and then I thought, okay, what's the future of Australia look like? Okay, what's important? Healthcare, aged care, I thought a lot about. Energy transition. I was like, whew, it's hard. A lot of smart people doing that.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, what do I really care about? Education's another one. So maybe there's something in one of those sectors, and had some great conversations. I'm doing, at the moment, I'm having a go at a chief operating officer role. And the thing I like about that, and remember, I've got that legal background. It's about, systems, processes, policies, enablement, but underpinning all that culture, and I've just done some work with my teams around, if our cultures, courage, humility, respect, initiative, trust, what is self-discipline? What does that look like day to day? Okay, what does it look like? It means that we admit our mistakes and learn from them, or we give clear communication. We have meetings in the meeting, not meeting after the meeting. We talk to people, not about them. What do these look like? So I like it that a COO role has that big culture piece to it.
Yeah.
I'm working in the education space. So for a company that owns and operates independent schools around Australia, their mission, they're Christian schools, so their mission is to equip kids spiritually, academically, physically and socially to have a positive influence on the world in which they live, which I love, because it's not just about the kids we teach, their families, their communities, their future communities. How do we enable them to have great jobs when they leave? So, and then a distance education program for kids who, for various reasons, would prefer to learn from home. And a lot of that is really technologically enabled. It's got a kind of, they literally have the best teachers in our network recording the classes. The kids can do it at their own pace, but they still have teachers and mentors and homerooms and chat functions and all that. So it's education of the future, and then early learning as well. So it's a really, mission orientated and national. I haven't done a national role in a while because I've been state government. So super interesting.
And back to impact and future and change and
7,500 kids and their families, 1,000 staff. How do we support them?
And what a brilliant part of your story to take to that role of how important community is throughout it all. Yes.
And then our school, exactly. Our schools are communities. Every child, well known, well loved, well taught. That's part of our mission. It's like, well loved. How does a kid come to school and feel well loved no matter what circumstances they woke up that day in?
Yeah, well, that's a hard one for schools.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, because you've got
but
kids
probably
there a portion of the day, but they've got a lot of their life outside school. Yeah, so how can they come and be? And school, I think increasingly in society, school looks a bit different for everyone, right? Like kids learn differently. Kids are bringing different kind of they have different needs, different, cognitive variations. So there's a lot and our teachers are heroes. Like I knew that when I was state government, and I hand on heart say it even more now that I'm working so closely with them. You know, going to one of our schools and sitting with Barb on the front desk and just saying, what does your day look like? You know, what makes your day hard? What's the pebble in your shoe? How can I fix that? So, yeah, it's been really good.
And I think what a beautiful future as well, because if kids are well loved, then that gives an opportunity for them, you know, so maybe they're in the media and they don't talk a certain way about women in politics.
Right.
And maybe they're the people who decide to toe the line, but, you know, feel empowered to reach out and see how you're going.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, not just even in that direction, in the other direction as well. Like, feel empowered enough to reach backwards and say, loved working with you as well. You know, like, so maybe that's the sort of missing piece in your story that you're now putting into other people's stories.
Yes, there might be, some, again, that comes back to that redemptive thing that I was referring to before around stories. It's like, actually, often if you wait long enough, you see some level of redemptiveness where actually I went through that, but now it's come back around and someone is for the better, or a system's been approved because of it. You know, it's like, okay, I love that piece.
And you would see that as God's plan.
Precisely. Yeah, that's it. There's nothing that surprises him, and he brings us all through. It's basically everything we go for is to prepare us for something else, you know, and it's that his story is always a redemptive story. And how can people of faith take that and actually be a positive impact on the world around them? We're not in a vacuum. We're not meant to just sit at home by ourselves with our Bible. It's like, no, get out there. Get out there.
Don't fall down.
Yeah.
Get up and there's good things.
That's right.
Hopefully.
Yep. Yeah. That's it.
They're beautiful. What a great chat. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to share with people? Is there a way to support the Christian school network that you're working with, or is there a good book you want to recommend?
Oh, a good book. I mean, I did reference Phosphorescence before, which was great. I'm reading How to Know a Person by David Brooks, which is interesting. One of the chapters in that he talks about there are people who are illuminators and people who are diminishers.
Yeah.
I want to be an illuminator. You know, you're being an illuminator right now. And it's like, hold on. You know, sometimes we need to, you know, shut the heck up, listen.
Yeah.
Listen to what particular individuals or population segments or, you know, kids or elderly, but just listen to who they are and what they might need and kind of approach a conversation that way rather than just listening to respond or listening for what you want to get out of it.
Well, funnily enough, we've done 20-odd episodes, Always Be Connecting, talking to different people, and in every episode, the word listen is very prominent.
That's interesting.
That's what it's all about.
Meant to be. No, but thank you for having me, and it's good to, you know, be a bit of a storyteller, but alongside a real storyteller. So.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Amy Brown.
Pleasure.
Have a good day.
I will. Thank you.